I'm going to start with the first 5 questions that I asked Dr. Paul.
Good.
If I can find it. Okay. Limited government means a lot of public sector jobs are going to be lost. As challenging as that is, how are you going to go about doing that?
Well, I think what we need to recognize is that the alternative is no government at all. That's the alternative. The alternative is a monetary collapse where there is no national defense, there's no healthcare system. So I think everybody in this country recognizes that this really has to be mutual sacrifice that all of us are going to have to experience, but none of that's being presented. It's like Santa Claus is coming, Easter Bunny's going to be here, Tooth Fairy alive and well. I don't think so. I think these are gigantic issues that we're not moving on at all.
Absolutely. Let me double check something real quick. We're good. We've been off course for decades, so recovery is going to take a long time. If left unchecked, if libertarians like yourself don't win, how do you see this playing out?
Well, that eventually libertarians are going to win. I hope it's not as a result of a collapse where libertarians are being called on to come in and reign over that. But actually, in cases of collapse, historically, usually you have the opposite happening. You have extremely strong government that takes over. You have an absolute police state that takes over.
Right. Talk to me about the future of the dollar as the standard currency.
Well, if we embark, I am promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. If we elect a president promising to do that, that's going to send a really, really strong message that the dollar is to be relied on, not to be vacated.
If vacated, talk about that.
Well, this is where we're headed, given no action at all on the unsustainable debt and spending that we have.
Sure. Trying to knock out the most important ones first. The empire that we have constructed through our government is unsustainable. What country would you like to see us similar to?
Well, I think we're going to blaze our own trail here, but let's get back to the beacon on the hill. Let's get back to the United States being all about liberty and freedom, personal freedom, us making decisions in our own lives, and whatever we're going to do in our benevolence. Meaning, I'm in the camp that really believes there are those that are truly in need, but for government, perhaps they don't receive those goods and services that they do need. But that's a healthcare safety net that can exist, but all of that needs to occur in a balancing revenues with expenditures. Sure. In our benevolence, if we so choose to create these safety nets, which, by the way, I think that is something that we do need to do, but it needs to be in the context of not borrowing a cent to do that.
China has indicated a little bit that they need to dump some of their U.S. dollar reserves. What would it look like if the outside world gave up on the dollar?
Well, more than half the U.S. currency is abroad. So giving up the dollar is are shiploads of money coming back to the United States. And that's an ugly scene. I mean, that's a further devaluation of the dollar when that occurs. And I say when because our unwillingness to deal with our unsustainable debt and spending is going to end up having that result.
And what happens if the public gives up on the dollar?
Well, this is what's going to happen in a monetary collapse. A monetary collapse is going to be a bond market collapse where people are going to demand. And by the way, the bond market right now is so skewed because it's a closed loop. It's talking about auditing the Federal Reserve. Well, that would be telling all of us what assets are they buying and how many. Are we literally buying up all of our own treasuries? How much of that is public? How much of that is the Federal Reserve? I mean, it's scary. We don't know. If we knew, you know, that in and of itself might precipitate fleeing the dollar.
Sure. The national debt, the official debt, 16 trillion. That's a lot. But unofficially, we've got liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and what we're projected to spend on military and all programs. Professor Lawrence Kotlikoff out of Boston University, are you familiar with him?
Mm-mm.
He has taken the CBO reports, he's a libertarian, and looked at this and basically come up with a shortfall. All obligations minus taxes. And he projects that shortfall to be $211 trillion. Now, going forward, what's your reaction to that number?
Well, that it is that's the number. Now, balancing the federal budget tomorrow, you eliminate all those liabilities by balancing the federal budget now, because all those liabilities are based on current expenditures and current benefit levels. So obviously, balancing the federal budget is scaling back on those benefits, drawing new lines. But in the context of not spending more money than what you take in, by balancing the federal budget, you zero out those liabilities going forward. You don't do away with the $16 trillion in debt. That still has to be paid back, and that still could precipitate a monetary collapse. But you do away with all those unfunded liabilities. They go to zero.
Sure. The current administration, Republicans, Democrats, they all throw out this word default as if to say, we'll default, you won't get your Social Security checks. But Dr. Dambisa Moyo, who's an economist out of London, has put out 4 scenarios describing how in deep doo-doo we are. From least likely to most likely, she wrote about this. She said the least likely event which would help us out of this hole would be some catastrophic event where our debts were forgiven. Asteroid, or severe earthquake, something unforeseeable. Next up would be some type of major conflict where whatever. But following that are the 2 most likely. And one is the monetary collapse, which is scary. The other one she was actually advocating for is default. On some level, as much as we owe, we're going to have to default on these obligations. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, that it is. I would agree with this. That default is not out of the question. But for those that cringe at the notion of default, because default then means less valuation for everybody that may own a government note, the solution, the fix to all this is balancing the federal budget now. That does not say that we still can't have the collapse because of the debt that we've already taken on. But the first step, we're miles away from just taking the first step.
Absolutely. Count to 5 for me again.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Looks good. I need you to. The average person is going to have a hard time comprehending monetary failure. What is life going to be like that if that happens?
So, a monetary collapse. What is a monetary collapse? A monetary collapse is when the dollars that we have don't buy a thing because of the accompanying inflation that goes along with it. The shelves are bare because very quickly everybody recognizes that dollars aren't worth anything. So everybody rushes out and buys everything they possibly can because very quickly dollars don't buy a thing. If we want to look at a country that has experienced a monetary collapse of late, that would be Russia at the end of the 80s, where the ruble went from being worth something one day to being worth nothing the next day. Ugly, ugly situation. They went to the most sophisticated barter system the world has ever seen. It's not something that we want to experience in this country. The shelves were bare.
Sure. Locally in Shreveport, that's where I'm from, northwestern corner of the state, I just interviewed someone who's a libertarian running against a longtime Democrat. Chances are slim to none, but it's not a wasted vote. Tell me why.
Well, a wasted vote is voting for somebody that you don't believe in. Vote for who you believe in. That's how you change politics in this country. And let me point out something that I hope becomes obvious. If everybody wastes their vote on me, I'm the next president of the United States, and I'm going to suggest that nobody ends up regretting that.
Sure. There are some similarities with Republicans and Libertarians, yet Republicans don't necessarily act like their party would dictate. Should Republicans fear Libertarians?
Well, I think Republicans should embrace Libertarians, as I think Democrats should embrace Libertarians. Libertarians, speaking with a broad brushstroke, are fiscally responsible and socially accepting. And I don't use the word tolerant because tolerance implies that I don't like what you're doing, but I'm okay. Well, I suggest that for the most part, we don't really care what other people do as long as their activities don't impact us in a way that puts us in harm's way. So, speaking with a broad brushstroke, Republicans ought to embrace Libertarians on dollars and cents. Speaking with a broad brushstroke, Democrats should embrace Libertarians on civil liberties.
Do you foresee Libertarians replacing the Republican Party?
I do. I absolutely do. Keep in mind that all of the faces on Mount Rushmore were third parties at one time or another.
Sure, and there used to be a Federalist Party and a Republican-Democrat Party. Federalist Party was replaced, so this could happen.
Well, this is the fastest growing segment of American politics today, and for those that are going to bury their head in the sand and think this isn't happening, well, they're going to suffocate and die.
Absolutely. I think we've covered just about everything, but let me look at my most important questions to make sure. Are Americans facing austerity?
Yes, in a big way. In a big way. But that's not a bad thing, and the whole notion that we all mutually sacrifice to achieve this, what we end up achieving is this country moves forward. Good thing.
Absolutely. Not a scary word. Let's see. Both of your opponents say they're going to fix this economy based on a pro-growth idea. I mean, how flawed is this?
Well, it may not be flawed. I mean, they may be accurate with that, but I would rather be on the safe side and not incorporate growth into the equation at all. I am promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. That will be based 100% on cutting federal government spending, not anything built into a growth component.